my name is Demeritte, and I'm presenting on why separating variable and fixed expenses is important. First, we'll talk about what are variable expenses, what are fixed expenses, and then we'll talk about the importance of separating variable and fixed expenses. Variable expenses are those costs that businesses incur that are dependent on production, or they are directly proportional to activity level. That is, the more a company produces a product, the more variable costs that it will incur. Some common examples of variable expenses are production workers' wages, raw material, and transportation expense. So what are fixed expenses? These are costs that are not dependent on production. They remain constant throughout the relevant range during a period, and they do not fluctuate with activity level. That means no matter how much a company produces, their fixed costs will always stay the same. Some common examples of fixed expenses are rent and mortgage, insurance expense, salaries, and depreciation expense. This graph here shows the relationship between fixed costs, variable costs, and total costs. As you can see, no matter how much you sell, your fixed costs will always stay the same. But the more you sell, the more variable costs you'll have. And total cost is just the sum of variable costs and fixed costs. So why do we separate variable and fixed costs? First, businesses use this for forecasting and budgeting. They prepare financial statements so they can see their estimated revenues and expenses for future periods. It is used in calculating gross and net profit. It is also used for setting a profitable price. Businesses don't want to price their products too high or too low where they won't make a profit or their customers aren't satisfied. And it's also used for understanding economies of scale. So the more a business produces, their fixed expenses is spread over a wider base, so they are winning in the long run. And most importantly, it is used for computing ratios. And the two ratios we'll look at today is the contribution margin and the burn ratio. The contribution margin is calculated by subtracting variable costs from sales, and the contribution margin ratio is calculated by dividing the contribution margin by the sales. This ratio is used for the break-even analysis, where companies will see if they will break even with their production or they will generate profits. And it's also used for the burn ratio, and that is calculated by dividing current assets by average daily operating costs. The burn ratio is for startup companies who don't have a steady cash inflow, and investors use it to see if the expected revenues and expenses of the businesses are what actually are incurring, and it helps them to decide whether to invest in the company or not. So we went over variable expenses, fixed expenses, and the importance of why separating variable and fixed expenses is important. And that's my presentation.